How many of us pray the Rosary or Divine Mercy or Novena prayer as if they were some incantation, expecting God to answer our prayers by the sheer number of times we pray them? Or sometimes we get so frustrated because we often are driven by a checklist prayer mentality or give up because God did not answer our prayers. But there is a logical progression or path of prayer which can truly eliminate all of our vices, build virtues, and help us on our imperfections. This logical path of prayer or ascetical prayer life is simple and truly harnesses the power of prayer to become more loving, caring, peaceful, and holy. The power of prayer is not getting God to answer our prayers, but by willingly change who we are by loving God through prayer. Hello everyone. Today's episode is about how to harness the power of prayer through an ascetical prayer life. The topic of prayer will span multiple episodes, but today's episode will help us understand the type and grade of prayer so we can implement them to grow in holiness.
Welcome to another episode of Practical Catholic with David Cease. Practical Catholic is a spiritual coaching show to help you find peace, love, and joy in family and work life. We are here each and every week to help you grow spiritually, to become successful in this life, and to be a saint for the life after.
My story begins when I went to the basic school for the Marine Corps. The basic school is a school in the Marines that all Marine officers have to go through. It's a 6-month course in which I always tell people I learn how to be an officer and a gentleman, as well as learn how to eat with the right fork at a formal dinner and kill a person with my left pinky. Being a little facetious there, but it spans lots of things. And one of the courses that I really liked was a course called Tactics. Tactics is very, very interesting. And the reason why I liked it was because you get to study the science of warfare. Warfare is both a science and an art. The art part of warfare is leadership, decisiveness, making different decisions, having empathy, making the right decision at the right time. And that's more of an experiential type of lesson that we learned, and we did that a lot. But the science of warfare was understanding the weapons and the how you can get troops to do certain things. So it was very, very interesting because it wasn't just about studying a weapon. It was how to use that weapon to culminate into a bigger type of tactical advantage. So I'll give you an example. One of them would be, how to create the perfect defensive perimeter. And we would learn everything about the weapons and how you would use those weapons to create the perfect defensive perimeter. And this is what you would do. So you would learn how to, let's say I was a platoon commander. A platoon commander would have roughly around 45 plus Marines at least. And they would have machine guns and they would have rifles. And so what you would do is you would have them entrenched, and the rifles and machine guns are bullets. And then what they do is they fire guns in a direct line. We call rifles and machine guns direct fire. Direct fire means that for more intents and purposes, bullets go in a straight line. Now, if you know anything about guns, they don't really go in a straight line. They kind of arc a little bit. But for intents and purposes, they go in a straight line. And so, you create in there what we call interlocking fire. Interlocking fire is when you are shooting at an angle, all right? So if you split your platoon in half, the right half of your platoon is shooting to the angling left, and the left platoon is angling to the right, creating this interlocking fire. So basically, there's not an inch of space that won't have a bullet. So you never fire in a straight line because then you would create what they call lanes, and those lanes would not have any bullets in them. So that's one thing that you do. We learned about landmines. All right, a lot of people don't realize, but landmines really aren't. Their job is to kill people. Landmines are to do psychological warfare, to channelize, as well as to slow down the enemy. So in a perfect defensive perimeter, I would use landmines to actually channelize the troops. Why? Because I want them to channelize them to what we call the killing zone. The killing zone is where the interlocking fire is where I created. So we want the bullets to actually kill or, to hurt the enemy. And so what we do is we use we might use landmines to channelize them. Barbed wire. Barbed wire is the same thing as landmines to slow them down, to also channelize them to the killing zone. That's what we would do. The next would be, if I were a platoon commander, I would look for what we would call divots inside the terrain. So because bullets go in a straight line, if you have small little divots, literally only about 4 or 5 inches low, and if they kept themselves low down, they would not be able to be shot because there's an elevation in the bullets. So what we would do is we would look at our terrain and make sure that those divots we would cover them by what we call indirect fire. So bullets are direct fire. Indirect fire is things like mortar rounds. These are things that get lobbed into or come from the air and get lobbed into so that they can cover those divots. So common indirect fire is mortar rounds, grenade launchers. So I might have a bunch of Marines who know how to fire grenade launchers to lob the grenades inside those areas. Artillery, bombs, they're all indirect fire. And so that's what we would do. Then lastly, what we would do is we would actually plot out our location. So what we would do is we would plot out an area which we would call final protective fire, which means that if artillery needs to get called, they would bring in a sheet of artillery rounds that would cover, maybe about 100, 200, or maybe, depending on what it is, maybe even to 500 yards in front of us, so that artillery could get there, and the enemies are coming through. If that was the last resort, then we would also plot our own location so that air support could basically blow up our location. A theory behind that is if the enemy is in our compound, and if we're going to go down, then the enemy is going to go down with us. So we learn all of these different weapons, and we learned about how to use them, and our objective, our higher end objective, like defending a position, all right, and how to employ each weapon. The reason why I tell this story is because, a lot of us take our prayer life and simplify it by just doing certain types of rote prayer or certain types of vocal prayer, and a lot of them boils down to petition. And that really is limiting what the prayer life is all about. It really does. That would be like going to warfare and just bringing a rifle and saying all warfare is the rifle. And I can tell you right now, that is not the case at all. You'll lose every battle if it's just about the rifle. It's about more than that to win a war. And so we do have a spiritual warfare. That spiritual warfare is between the three enemies of the soul: ourself, the devil, and the world. So we have to know what are these weapons, these tools of warfare. And the single most tool is our prayer life, right? And just like the different types of weapons that are out there, like rifles and mortar rounds and artillery and even nuclear bombs, they all have a grade. They all have an impact, right? So, for example, if a rifle is excellent for a sniper, and when to use a sniper, it's a very localized, single instance, versus using a machine gun, versus using a mortar round, versus using artillery, versus using a missile. All right, so you used various types of grades, as well as different types of weapons for what's going on. And that's exactly like our prayer life. So by understanding our prayer life and understanding what the different grades there are in the prayer life will actually help us win the war, win that spiritual warfare that is there. So first, let's talk about what is prayer. Now, most of this talk is going to be centered around Father Marin's book called Christian Perfection. It's an excellent book. He is a Dominican, or he was a Dominican. He passed away early 2000, and he taught at the Angelicum. So, what is prayer? All right, prayer defined by Father Marin says prayer has been defined in various ways, but basically all the definition agree in emphasizing that prayer is an elevation of the mind to God in order to converse with Him. Theologically, prayer is an act of the virtue of religion, a virtue related to justice. In the higher degree of prayer, however, as the soul is more and more permeated by the virtue of charity, prayer becomes the language of love. Psychologically, prayer is an operation of the intellect, the practical intellect, under the impetus of the will. Wow, there's a chock full of things right there. So prayer is, at the end result of prayer, at the end of the day, is an elevation of the mind to God. It's an encounter with God. That's what it is. All right? It's our elevation to God so we can converse with Him. That's what prayer is. All right? So we want to have this conversation with prayer. Now, what does that mean? It means that we have to use the act of the will to converse with Him. All right? So, it's not just doing the prayer that matters. It's actually wanting to converse with Him, which is an act of the will. That's why it's a virtue. It's a virtue of religion. This is why Father Marin says that. Because without our act of the will, all right, we are not truly praying. So if we are going to Mass and we're constantly distracted there, we are not elevating ourselves to have a conversation with God. All right? It's at a very superficial way. So we're not listening to God, we're not hearing God, we're not encountering with God. This is why. Now, how is it a virtue? Because Father Marin points out that it is an operation, at the end of the day, it's an operation of the intellect. That's what it is. It's an operation to our intellect. God gave us an intellect so we can converse with God. That's why. Not just to solve problems, not just to reason, not just to be here on earth, but He gave us an intellect so we could converse with God. All right? That's how we converse with Him when we're up in heaven, is through our intellect. So we're going to be able to converse with God. And so that takes the act of the will. Because our intellect can be distracted by earthly things, by things that, we're more worried about, as opposed to, focusing on God. In my further episode, I'm going to talk about how do we, focus on that prayer life in a practical way to focus on it. So it's a virtue. It's the virtue of religion, and we have to build that habit of using our intellect, all right, to converse with God. If you go to Mass and you don't participate in that Mass and converse and use the act of the will to intellectually, pray and assent to God, then it's really almost meaningless, right? It is really, really meaningless. It's because you're not valuing it, all right? So, it would be like going to your grandfather's house, but never talking to him, never conversing with him. Not even acknowledging that he's there, and eating his food, all right, and spending time there, but not conversing with your grandfather. That's what it's like. So it is a virtue, And what it does is we elevate ourselves to have a conversation with God, or what I like to call an encounter with God. Now, one of the things I want to highlight here is we also pray to saints. So how do we reconcile this fact that prayer is actually a conversation with God, and yet when we pray, it sounds like we're actually to the saints. It almost sounds like we're actually praying to the saints. Okay? So where's this disconnect? Well, Father Martins quotes, I believe, St. Thomas Aquinas, and he says this about praying to the saints. Prayer is offered to a person in two ways. Okay? First, to be fulfilled by him, and secondly, to be obtained through him. In the first way, we offer prayer to God alone, since all our prayers ought to be directed to the acquisition of grace and glory, which God alone gives, according to Psalm 83, verse 12. The Lord will give grace and glory, but in the second way, we pray to the saints, whether angels or men, not that God may know our petitions through them, but that our prayers may be effective through their prayers and merits. So what St. Thomas is saying is this. There is two, when we offer prayers to a person, it's one way. One is to fulfill something, right? And in this case, God fulfills us by giving us grace and glory. That's the end result, is to give us grace and glory. The second way is really to obtain something through that, right? So when we pray to saints, we're actually using them to converse with God. No different than when when you go to court, in a court of law, right? You can either defend yourself in front of the judge and jury, or you can use a lawyer. You can use a lawyer to defend you, right, with the judge and jury. And a lawyer actually acts as if he was you, okay? It's what we call that the power of attorney, right? When you have the power of attorney, that means that person at that moment is acting as if he or she is you. All right? Now, why would you do that? Why would, as an attorney, have the power to do that? Because you might not know what all the laws are. You yourself might not know what the best cases are. All right? So what you do is you get an attorney who has a power of attorney to represent you to defend yourself in a court of law. It's the same way when we're praying to the saints. You're still conversing with God, but you're giving, in essence, the power of attorney to that saint, so that he or she, that saint, is more efficacious in conversing with God because of the merits and the prayer, the effective prayer merits, because they're saints. And they've created this great merit. So that's what it is. So when you're praying to a saint, you're still conversing with God, but you're doing it with a power of attorney, almost like to saints. That's what you're doing. So just like I would not always want to defend myself in front of a judge and jury, because I might not be qualified or I have some issues, you can choose to do that. But the best way of doing and defending yourself in a court of law is using an attorney, okay? And so that's what we're doing with saints, all right? So now let's talk about the 4 types of prayer. The first type of prayer is called adoration, all right, or praising God. That's the first. Now, this is the first and most excellent type of prayer. This is really the best prayer, is adoration, prayer of adoration. The second is petition. When we're asking God for a favor, we're petitioning him, such as intercessory prayers, right? So, but the thing about petition is that's typically the first in practice, believe it or not. Everyone falls under prayer. It's very easy to understand prayer of petition because it's just basically asking God for something, right? And it goes down deep into our needs. But I'll get back to this a little bit. But petition prayer is. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do petition prayers. In fact, we should. But a lot of times, that's what our prayer life typically falls under. And it becomes a myopic prayer life. Very myopic prayer life. The next is a prayer of thanksgiving. Showing God gratitude. Showing God gratitude. So, if you really, really look at these 4 types of prayer, and if you pray all of this in a well-balanced way, you will really have an encounter with God. You really will. But a lot of times our prayer life is short-circuited. It is a myopic in a sense. It's usually, when we think of prayer, it's typically petitional prayer. But we don't think of the other areas. Now, I'm going to go over the Mass real quickly to describe each one of these types of prayer. And this is why you need to fully participate in the Mass, because it touches on every aspect of these 4 types of prayer. And that by doing that, you will have a richer encounter with God. All right? So the first thing that we do is we always make the sign of the cross, which in essence, the sign of the cross is adoring God, because it's by the power and the sign of the cross that we have been redeemed. That's the glory. That's adoration. It's praising God. If it weren't for the cross, we would definitely not be saved. It's that cross that makes us saved and brings us to heaven. So that's adoration right there. Just that simple sign of the cross. And that's what Father begins, right? In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, right? Then typically they go into the Confiteor, I confess, all right? Or the Kyrie eleison, all right? Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy. What is that? That's contrition. That's what it is. That's really what it is that, to say before we go any further in this prayerful Eucharistic celebration, we're going to say to our Lord, forgive me for my sins. Forgive me, for I am a sinner. Just like, that tax collector that went in and he said, Lord, I'm not worthy, I am a sinner. To get rid of all the venial sins inside of us, to eliminate that, to truly say to God, I am sorry, for I am a sinner. All right? That's an encounter with God. That's a conversation, elevating ourselves. Because when you're at Mass, time stands still, and you are now elevated to heaven, and you're conversing with Him, just as if He's in the room. And you're conversing with all the saints. That's what the statues represent. The statues represent all of that. The saints are there. The angels and the saints, they're all there. That's what the statues represent. To give us the physical realization of the spiritual reality, which is that all of the saints, angels, and God are there. So we want to have a deep and contrite heart for the failures, for the imperfections that we did throughout the week. So we go into that. Then we do a collect prayer. A collect prayer. It's called a collect because we collect ourselves. We're collecting ourselves and we're praying. And in this case, most of the time, that's an adoration. Again, most of the Mass is adoration. So we're going to do more and more prayers. The next thing we're going to have, as we go down the road, down the line, are scripture readings. We're going to have Psalms, and all of that is praising God. All right? Scripture readings are important because it's not just adoration, but this is spiritual reading. All right? Things that we can meditate on. So then we go into the intercessory prayers. The intercessory prayers are basically petitions. We're petitioning God, asking God for a favor. Lord, and if you realize that after the deacon or the lector or reader, whoever reads the intercessory prayers, when he or she is finished, they will say, the last thing they'll say is something like, whatever is in our heart, and then they give a pause, about 7 to 10 seconds, that allows us then to ask for what we want or need. Okay? That's petitional prayer. And then lastly, we have thanksgiving prayer, a prayer of thanksgiving. All right? So, the prayers that are there, all right, are the prayer of thanksgiving is somewhere on the dismissal prayer. If you notice, it's a full, well-rounded, has all 4 types of prayer. Why? Why don't we just go into the Mass and do the Eucharistic prayer and receive Jesus in the Eucharist? Because the Mass is trying to teach us that the physical reception of Jesus through the Eucharist is really an encounter with God through all 4 types of prayer: adoration, petition, contrition, and thanksgiving. It's not just one. And yet, how many of us focus on just petition? This is, if you were to poll most Catholics and ask them, hey, what are the 4 types of prayer? I venture to say that they wouldn't know. But they would know that you can ask for something from God. All right? Now, I am not saying that that's a bad thing. In fact, I encourage us to do that. What I am saying is we can't be myopic to our prayer life and reduce it just to petitional prayer. All right? Just to petitional prayer. Because that is very limiting, and you will never have a full encounter with God. All right? And it will lead to disappointment. It really will. Because God's answer sometimes in our prayer, it might be no. Right? And He answers our prayers, and the answer means yes or no. Like I tell my kids. My kids will say, Daddy, I want to get a bicycle. Can I have a bicycle? And I'll say no. 2 seconds later, they'll say, Daddy, can I have a bicycle? And I tell them no. And then finally, I look at them and I say, what part of my answer don't you understand? It's no. All right? I answered your request. It's no. All right? And sometimes God says that. He will say no. Because, He's not a servant. But when we reduce our life, our prayer life just a petition, we will be disappointed. We try to seek that miracle. But the real miracle occurs when, we are transformed and have an encounter with God. I love this story about this person. He was a paralytic. And one of the priest friend of mine used to know him. He recently passed away. And it was about a gentleman, long time ago. He passed away, I believe, in his 70s or 80s. So this accident occurred a long time ago, 70, 80 years, when he was about, I believe, 17 years old. This gentleman had dived into a swimming pool, a shallow swimming pool, and it broke his neck, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. And he was paralyzed all from the neck down and could not move. And he was that way for his entire life, which was, I believe he died in the late 70s, early 80s. And so he was a very disgruntled person, extremely disgruntled, and very bitter, which is rightly so. I mean, when you're cut down in your youthful life because of an accident like that, you cannot but be disheartened. And so eventually a priest who was working with him got his hopes up and said, hey, let's go to Our Lady of Lourdes. And so he gets him all side because Lourdes has a miraculous capability. I mean, just all the miracles that occurred. All right, from healing people from crutches, all the physical healings that they've done. So they go to Lourdes, and he's dipped into the freezing water. It's very cold because it's spring water. And lo and behold, he is not cured. He's still a paralytic. So he's flying back home, and his priest friend is just, apologizing to the paralytic and says, I apologize for not, getting your hopes up, and this is what happens. And he looks at the priest, and he says, Father, I am healed. And the priest looks at him, and he says, what? And he goes, I'm healed in a spiritual way. I don't feel sorry for myself. I've had this encounter with God that's healed me spiritually. And from that moment on, his spiritual life and his, increased because his encounter with God increased. And he became a motivational speaker, which we would call today a motivational speaker. Basically, a lot of young teenagers who were troubled and everything would come and visit him, and he would talk to them. He had transformed a lot of teenagers who were going down the wrong path, whether it be depression, whether it be drugs, alcohol, whatever it was, to show them to stop having pity about themselves and have an encounter with God so that they could be fruitful in their lives. And he transformed them. That's the power of prayer. That's the power of encountering God. You see, Lourdes cured physically hundreds of people. But you see, millions of people go there every year. And yet, if you take a percentage of how many physically are healed versus how many visit Lourdes, it's a very small fraction. But I can venture to say that most of the cures are spiritual cures when people go to Lourdes. And if we were able to calculate that miracle, I think the percentage would be a lot higher. Just like my priest, his friend, that spiritual healing through an encounter with God. And that's what we're going to do, right? So I'm not doubting petitional prayers. Petitional prayers are tremendous. And God gave us petition prayers because as human beings, from day one, we were called to ask for help. See, pride says that we don't want to get help, that we can do it on our own. So petitional prayers are important. In fact, petitional prayer is what we would call the honey of prayer. It begins the prayer life. The problem is that most people just stay there at that level, as opposed to understanding the other three types of prayer, so they can have a true encounter with God, all right? And not just expect him to be a servant. So I don't want to think that, make you think that we shouldn't do petitional prayers, because you should. You should always do petitional prayer. But we can't limit ourselves to that. All right. The second thing I want to have a paradigm to understand is, a lot of times we talk about the power of grace. That's all about God, and he's the miracle worker. And I definitely agree that God is the initiator and is very important. But there is a role that we play, okay? So when we pit God against man in our spiritual life, in our prayer life, then we are being like a one-winged airplane. We're going to crash and burn, all right? So there's two concepts to understand in a prayer life. One is called the ascetical prayer life, and the one is called mystical prayer life. Most of the time, most Catholics are focusing on the mystical prayer life. I've seen this a lot. But when you talk to them and you ask them about their prayer life, they seem to have a poor ascetical prayer life, but they claim that they have great mystical prayer life, and that is not right. That's not correct. It's very difficult to have a mystical prayer life if you don't have an ascetical prayer life. What is that? What is the ascetical versus mystical? Ascetical prayer life is having a prayer life that is dependent mainly on you. All right, your virtues. So we're going to talk about the grades of prayer, and we're going to talk about the first out of the 9 grades of prayer life. 4 of them are the ascetical prayer life, which means that it's all dependent on you, whether you focus or not. All right. The other 5 are going to be in the mystical prayer life. Mystical here is when God takes you to a higher level of an encounter, okay? Elevates that encounter with him, all right, to the point of what we call union with him, all right? A union with him. Almost like what St. John says, he was elevated to heaven, basically, right? So that's the mystical. Now that is dependent on God, and actually it really is not necessary to reach sanctity to get to that level, all right? Holiness can be achieved just in the ascetical way, all right? And become a great saint that way. Now, God does elevate certain saints to a union with God, but you don't need to have that. So, we have to understand that there's an ascetical way, and they feed off of each other. It's not like there's a line of demarcation that says I'm the ascetical or mystical, or once I'm in the mystical, I'll never need to go to ascetical. That is not the case. In fact, they're very intertwined with each other. All right. Great mystics will say they had to go back to ascetical, and then they were able to go back to mystical, and vice versa. Okay. So a good ascetical life is foundational to mystical. Why? There's 2 main reasons. Because an ascetical life is the baseline to encountering God. It creates that first initiation with God. The second reason is that ascetical prayer life changes who you are. It creates a living saint of who you are. And by doing that, God will have an encounter with you. God can't God can't call you up to heaven in the mystical life without you being holy in this life. All right? So the ascetical way is actually, purgating you, in a sense, preparing you to be elevated to the mystical life. And yet so many people, if I talk to them and say, and talk about mysticism and everything else, they're just focused on the aspect that, I'm there. And when you ask them about their ascetical life, they're not. It's typically just, inspirational, sentimentality, emotionalism, no different than, if I were to watch a movie, right? Watching a movie, even of my own kids, is sentimentality. It's not an encounter with my children. An encounter with my children is actually having a dialogue with my children. So, they might be over emotionalism or whatever, okay? So they confuse that. So we need to have that ascetical prayer life. Now, I want to read to you the Greek definition of asceticism. The Greek word really means exercise or train. And that is really what we're doing. That's why ascetical prayer is reliant on us, because we have to change who we are, and we have to train who we are to get to that level. Okay, so we don't pit God against man. All right, we can't do that. This is why the Catholic Church is so. A lot of people say, "Well, Mass is so boring. We go in, we do the same thing over and over and over and over again." Right? That's like joining a football team and saying, "Football is so boring." We do the same thing over and over and over. We keep running the plays. We keep, doing exercises, I was on the football team in high school, and we hated practice. I hated practice sometimes because we were doing the same thing over and over again, right? And what was exciting was the game, right? But if you don't have that good practice and know the plays inside and out, all right, by repetitively doing things over and over and over and over again, well, then you're not going to be a good football team or a good football player. So ascetical is exercise or training. And that part of that is doing the same thing over and over again. But here's the difference. The difference is that if you appreciate practice and doing things over and over again and use your brains to engage, you'll maximize the practice, So, for example, even though you do the same play over and over again, that play that I have will be different in how I react to the defensive members that are trying to go after me, all right? And I'm able to practice my different types of maybe jukes or my different types of going through the hole or how fast I'm going, how slow I'm going, or maybe it's blocked and I have to go somewhere around. All of that occurs. But if you just have this downer of it's the same thing over and over and over again, and it's so boring that you're never going to become a good football player. So the liturgy is, even though it's the same thing over and over again, it is the ascetical way. It's foundational. And so we can either participate intellectually by using our virtue and harnessing that ascetical prayer life, or we can just say, it's boring, and put our minds and think about something else while we're at Mass. So the ascetical methodology is you can see that prayer life in the Mass. You can see that in the liturgy of the hours. And you can see that even in the Rosary, okay? In the novenas. Why is it 9 days? Why can't I just pray it one time and it's done? It's 9 days because that's basically an ascetical prayer life. It's building virtue. It's not just once, not just twice, not 3 times, 4 times. You got to do it 9 times, okay? So it's an ascetical prayer life. But if we only limit it to the level of, that I'm only asking for this petition, it's boring, then we're not maximizing that our prayer life to have an encounter with God. So let's talk about the grades of prayer, okay? So a lot of theologians pretty much narrow it down to the 9 grades of prayer life, and where we get the 9 is based off of Saint Teresa of Avila. Now, Saint Teresa of Avila, the one thing is her spiritual director was a Franciscan. So Carmelites have this tie-in with the Franciscans. So Saint Teresa of Avila, now the names, she might not have used these precise names, but work with these theologians to get these names down, right? But the one thing I'm also going to add in here, not that I think I'm better than Saint Teresa or something like that, but it's not really part of the prayer life. That's why it's not added in here. But I'm going to call it holy reading, okay? There is a requirement for holy reading. So that would be at the beginning. So this is the grades of prayer life. And when we say grades, we're talking about like a different level of prayer, right? You're getting elevated, let's say, right? Our ultimate, if we were to look at an encounter with God, the highest encounter with God is this union with Him, all right? That's like the highest. The lowest is just, doing vocal prayer, just, saying like the Rosary, and that's it, with no benefits or anything. So the highest form of prayer is union with God. But remember, all prayers have to have an action to it, right? We have this idea that prayer has no action to it, right? What is that action? That action is to transform us, okay? That's what it is. Because the results, the fruit of prayer is love. Love is active. Love is not deactive. It's active. So the end result, the highest grade that you can get is this union with God that totally transforms who we are. Not because God put something in us that makes us different than who we are. It's because we willingly change who we are. That's the power of God's grace, is the ability for us to change, all right? Not for God to force us to change. That's the most important thing to understand. God wants us to change because love demands that we change. When we love someone, we change who we are. Why does God say when two become one, two become one? When I was married to my wife, both my wife and I had to conform, all right, and become one. All right? That means I had to change. I didn't go still living my old way, all right? My wife didn't keep living her old way. Then what's the sense of being married if we're going to keep living our old way? No, the two become one. And that one is because I'm there to serve my wife is there to serve me. And what does that change occur? That change occurs that I have to stop thinking selfishly. That's what I have to do. I have to stop thinking about myself. And so little by little, I start detaching and start helping and serving my wife and my children. And conversely, she does the same with me. That's what the change is all about. So love demands that we change. So when we say grade, we're talking about gradations. We're talking about, that this is the basic grade. This is this, and getting higher and higher and higher. So there's 9 grades, 9 levels, we'll call it, right? The first 4 are attributed to what we call the ascetical prayer life. That means, ascetical here means that we have control over this. The other 5 that are left, grade level, is the mystical stage. The mystical here is that you can't do this on your own. God elevates you to that higher level. Okay? So let me read them off. All right? What I'm only focusing on is the ascetical part. That's what I'm really focusing on. All right? Down the road, I'll define what the other 5s are, but that's just for FYI, and if God calls you to it, then great and, wonderful. But what's most important for all Catholics is the ascetical prayer life. So let's talk about that. The first is vocal prayer. Okay, the first grade is vocal prayer. Vocal prayer is any prayer that is expressed in words, as well as I'm going to briefly go over the first 4, but my next, I think, episode, I'm going to go into this more in depth. All right, but vocal prayer is basically any prayer that is written or said. Okay, and in doing that, the second is meditation prayer. That's strictly using the intellect to meditate, to think about God. It's really more about thinking and recursively thinking. Effective prayer is basically meditation, but meditation with a prayer life that allows us to have more sentiment into that prayer life. And then a prayer of simplicity. The prayer of simplicity is when we're meditating and have effective prayer, but we're really focusing on one aspect of God as opposed to all these other aspects of God. A lot of times in our prayer life, we don't need to, in a sitting, think about every single aspect. You can take one single topic and have it, meditate on it, make it effective. Effective means putting some sentiment and emotions involved with it because it brings things. And the prayer of simplicity is focusing on just one aspect as opposed to multiple aspects. Now, the power of prayer is that it transforms us. That is the key, okay? So what are the other five? The other five that falls under the mystical stage, which we're not going to talk about until down the road, is infused recollection, prayer of quiet, prayer of union, prayer of ecstatic union, and then prayer of transforming union. So really what it comes down into is that God is calling you to a union of God and elevating you. Now, that's his it all relies on him, not you. So, and that mystical stage is not something that is necessary for salvation. Sometimes we call that, the contemplative life in doing that. So we're going to go over the grades of prayer more in depth on our next episode. But suffice it to say, here's the bottom line. Or actually, let's talk about the paradigm shift. The paradigm shift really is to focus our prayer life in loving God by progressing through the grades of prayer. Meditation in the form of effective prayer and prayer of simplicity produces love for God, which helps us to make resolutions, change who we are, which can truly eliminate all our vices, build virtues, and help us on our imperfections. This logical path of prayer or ascetical prayer life is simple, and it truly harnesses the power of prayer. The power of prayer is not getting God to answer our prayers, but by changing who we are by loving God through prayer. How much is our prayer life about wanting something from God rather than using prayer to know and love God so I can change who I am? This does not mean we do not ask things from God, but you will see that things you ask will change from material to spiritual goods, from self to others. So the paradigm shift is really this. Regardless of what four types of prayer that you're doing, all of those prayer types is an encounter with God. That's what it is. And so when we encounter God, those prayers will help us to change who we are. That's the power of prayer. The power of prayer is not praying for a miracle, not praying for, some kind of insight. The power of prayer comes to the power that it changes us. Why? Because love is active. Love says, I will change. Because changing ourselves from this selfish being to a self-donating being is the power of love. Not just in heaven, but here on earth. But how many of us think the power of prayer is how many novenas we can do so we can get our prayers answered? That's not what it is. The power of prayer can only be harnessed through a holy man. In fact, the scripture says it's a holy and righteous man that will have his prayer answered. So, in a sense, it becomes this it becomes this cycle where the more that we do the ascetical life, the more we become holy. The more we become holy, the more our prayers will be answered. So that's what happens. But a lot of times we use God as some kind of Santa Claus where we ask him for something. Yeah, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. But no change in our own lives. And that's not what it's all about. The power of prayer is changing who we are. I've seen so many people get into this cycle, and I call this the vicious cycle of just, asking for God for something, then leave. Asking for God for something, then leave. No, not talking to him. What do we call a child that always asks for something but doesn't want to change his behavior? We call that a boy or a girl. And God does not want us to be spoiled. God answers our prayers so we can have an encounter with him. To say to them, I am here, but I want you to love me. And through that love, we will be able to transform who we are. So please stay tuned for next episode. We will go down and we're going to actually go down and talk about the first four grades of prayer. All right, that's vocal prayer, meditation, effective prayer, and prayer of simplicity. It's important to understand those grades so that we can go in that path and go down that way. So let's end it with a prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord Jesus, we pray that we may always encounter you, and no matter what types of prayer that we have, whether it be through petition, adoration, thanksgiving, or contrition, that we may always be loving towards you. Increase the love in our heart. Help us to build virtue of religion, that we may encounter you. We ask this through your name. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Thanks for listening to me, David Cease, at Practical Catholic. Here is a reflection for you. Take a moment and reflect. How much am I in love with God versus how much do I just want something from God? Feel free to share your reflection or leave a comment on the podcast, Instagram, and Facebook at Practical Catholic, or visit my webpage at practicalcatholic1, that is the number 1.com. Join me next week as we continue to discuss the power of prayer.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom